Hello everyone, this is Redden from VIP Guild with a Darkness Assassin Threat and Damage Rotation Guide. I'll be doing this guide from my ship on a targeting dummy to display the proper rotation for maximum threat and damage output. Please forgive my weird keybinds. These are located on my mouse, so I'll try to use my cursor to show you guys the tooltips and kind of explain what I'm doing if you guys can't see it. So to start off, I'm going to show my talent trees so that you guys know what build I'm talking about, and I'm just going to leave that there for a second. Tanks play a critical role in raids. As tanks, we have to think of ways in which to facilitate the encounters for our healers and for our DPSers. To help our healers out, we need to get our stat priorities straight and make sure our gearing schemes are up to par with that priority. Through modding and stuff like that. This guide doesn't cover that aspect of tanking. Instead, this guide is aimed at pleasing our DPSers by giving them the greatest leeway to do as much damage as they can without having to worry about pulling threat. So personally, I view needing to use a taunt as a flaw in my rotation. There are obviously some exceptions, like if there's a gear variance between the tank and the DPS, or if there's an encounter mechanic where we're forced to taunt off another player, or other special cases, but the notion still stands that taunts are to be used as utilities to facilitate our roles in raids, and not as a basic part of our tanking rotation for, let's say, a single mob with no taunt requiring mechanics. So to begin with, I'd like to touch on my perception of the concept of threat. I view threat, for me the easiest way to visualize threat is as a numerical value, a number, and then a modifier to that number. So the number is literally what pops up on your screen whenever you hit a target. That just appeared as 973, but for simplicity's sake, let's say it's 1,000. So for me, I just caused 1,000 damage to that mob and 1,000 threat. Now, this is where the modifier comes in. For tanks, most of their modifiers, if not all of them, give a threat increase. Whereas for healers and DPSers, it gives a modifier decrease. So let's get specific. If an assassin hits a target with shock that hits for 1,000 damage, it actually causes more than 1,000 threat to the mob because of two key factors for our particular build. The first is electrifying our talent trees. Forget the damage increase, but the fact that there's a 15% threat increase means that 1,000 damage attack actually acts as if it did 1,150, which is 15% more, on the threat meter than the damage meter because of that modifier. The second thing that affects threat for us specifically, is our stance, our dark charge, saber charge, whatever you want to call it. This tooltip reads that it increases our threat generation by 50%. So that one spell that hit for 1,000 damage, that got a 15% increase, also got a 50% increase above and beyond that. So literally it's hitting for more than 1,600 damage in threat, whereas the damage value is still 1,000. So if that's clear, I also want to move to the note that some abilities have a built-in threat modifier. So you'll see it in the tooltip itself, where it would read, for example, on Wither, it says that this ability generates a high amount of threat. So built in, this ability has its own innate threat increase for that ability. And this obviously just adds and adds and adds to our 50% increase from our stands or from other sources, and just makes us, threat machines. Now, the significance of this is that now that we know which spells cause the most threat, we can start to get a visualization of which spells cause more threat than others, and this allows us to basically set up a rotation based on our needs for threat when the time comes. So the way that it works is basically we're going to be going through this rotation a little slowly at the start, and I'll be talking to you guys through it, and then we'll do a full speed iteration of the rotation so that we can see how it affects our force. So I'm just gonna buff up here. There's my stim, there's my cutting, and right off the bat here, there are things that are going to distinguish you from a mediocre assassin tank, and it most importantly has to do with your force management. Here it needs to be near perfect for you to perform this rotation, and it's a lot easier said than done, especially here on my comfy ship. It's going to be a lot more difficult when you're trying to execute this rotation during a fight, which is why I suggest you get a lot of training in so that muscle memory helps you out a lot, and you don't have to think about your rotation as much as you would be thinking about the tanking guide. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. As much as you would be thinking about the fight mechanics. So, to start off, we're going to hit Dark Ward well before combat begins. Although this only costs 10 force, that's 10 force that you could otherwise spend someplace else. So, you want to have your Dark Ward active and your force replenished before you begin the pull. Another little tip or trick is what I mean to say, is to use force pull on the pull. Because first off, this has no threat cost, and it has a built-in threat modifier that I discussed earlier built into the tooltip. Although it does no damage, on a boss, it won't even pull them in, but the damage value for the threat threshold is still there. So, just by hitting this ability, you're going to cause an increase in threat, and it's great because it has a 30-yard range, so you actually start this on the run-in. So, the way that I would start it is basically to go with my Dark Ward, wait for my energy to get back, and I would on the run-in hit my force pull. After that, I hit a non-electrified shock. The first thing that I do is hit a shock, and the reason for this is because shock is our biggest single target threat ability, and it gives us a chance to cause another damaging spell, a 45% chance, that does 50% of that thing's damage. So it's the biggest bang for our buck in a sense. So after we have our Dark Ward up and we do our little pull run in, we hit a shock, and then right after that we hit a wither and a discharge back to back. And the reason for this is because you want to get your debuffs up. Now I'm going to click this off just so that you guys can see where we are in the rotation exactly. So let's do that again. We're going to go Dark Ward, and then we're going to go force pull, shock, wither, discharge. Now we're at 2 stacks of Harness Darkness, and the idea is to get up to 3 as fast as possible. But you kind of want to give it a little bit more damage / threat. So we're going to be fishing for an energized proc through Thrashes. And there it is. So as soon as it pops, you consume it, and then you go into your biggest damage rotation cycle, which is popping a power stim as well as recklessness. Now if you have a trinket that'll increase your power, that's good to pop here too, but I personally use both of mine for survival. So we're going to go boom, boom, and then queue up a Force Lightning. Now the Force Lightning is going to be hitting, and then at the end of the Force Lightning, that's when you want to hit another Dark Ward. And the second charge of your recklessness should be consumed by an energized shock. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this. Oh, I'm not going to. Anyway, it goes to an energized shock after that. Now, beyond that point, this rotation, just so that we are on the same page, this rotation is going to have some flaws in it. There's going to be some downtime. But with us, we're always going to be on the low end of our force meter here. So you kind of want to stay here, but sometimes it's worth it to go for one more Saber Strike, which has no cost, so that you can delay by a second, to get the ability that you want active at the right time. So instead of hitting a Wither as soon as I have 30 force, I'd wait for the extra seconds to have 39 force, so that I can hit a Shock instead of a Wither if the Wither debuff isn't about to drop off. Now, in terms of what we should consume our force with, what abilities consume our force that we should prioritize, the first one is Dark Ward. You have to have this up 100% of the time, and it's off the global cooldown, so you kind of want to chain it with another ability. You hit the ability, and at the last moment you would hit that spell for Dark Ward, and it would kind of go as one ability. So, Dark Ward is number 1, and your Wither debuff is number 2. But if you notice, the debuff duration is double the cooldown. So you don't have to hit this on cooldown by any means necessary. It's actually more threat for you to go for a Thrash and then an energized Shock every single time, unless it's an AoE situation. The third priority and final one is discharge. The 5% accuracy decrease is great, and it's nice. It's a nice little, damage that's an AoE thing for threat and stuff. But at the end of the day, if you have to prioritize which one, that's the priority. It goes Dark Ward, Wither, and then if you can, discharge. Now, as soon as we finish our 3-stack, let's do this again. So before the pull, we're going to hit this. My stim is on cooldown, so just act as if I'm going to hit it at the right time. And then on the run-in, we hit Force Pull, Shock, get our debuffs up for Wither, and Discharge, and then we're going to fish for a proc. And there it is. And then Recklessness plus the stim or the trinket, and then we're going to go into this. At this time, look at the Dark Ward. It should be back up. Now, beyond this point, look at Wither and look at Discharge. I had enough time to go for a Thrash and another Shock to fish for that second charge getting off. If you can't, for one reason or another, use it on Wither rather than Discharge. That second charge of Recklessness is what I'm talking about. So, we pull, we go Shock, Wither, Discharge, and then we go Energized Shock, and then we go Damage Rotation, which is Recklessness plus power buffs, and then we go Force Lightning, refresh your ward, and then fish for another Energized Shock. Beyond that point, we're going to Wither, have that up 100% of the time, and try to have Discharge up 100% of the time. And every time you get to 3 stacks of Harness Darkness, you're going to unload your Force Lightning. Never before 3. And you also want to only cast your shocks when it's energized beyond this point. Some exceptions apply if you know that the fight is going to end soon, or if you know the fight is going to go into a phase where you can't damage the mob, stuff like that. You would use a shock just to get it out of the way so that you don't have to fish for much longer. So, guys, that's pretty much the tanking rotation, and it just goes in cycles of that. Now, for me, in my particular case, this being a 1 minute 30-second cooldown, and this being a 3-minute cooldown, what I do is the first cycle is them stacked. So it goes, you build up to 3 stacks of Harness Darkness, and then you go to Recklessness plus the Power Stim. And then the next time that Recklessness is up, when you have 3 stacks, you use that alone. And then the third time, if the fight is long enough, you stack them both again. Now, if you have a trinket, usually trinkets have a 2-minute cooldown or a 1.5-minute cooldown. Basically, you're going to want to stack these the way that you see fit. And remember, this is not a survival guide, but at the same time, I find it very critical for us to be discussing Dark Ward, even though it's not a damage increasing ability. It's something that requires force, and in your damage rotation you're going to have to learn how to use your force. So let's take it from the top, and this time I'm just going to speak in the minimal, the least amount possible, so that we can get this full speed rotation going. So to start off, Dark Ward, ready, it's at 100%, and Force Pull with the Shock, debuff 1, debuff 2, fish for an Electrify, didn't get it, fish again, got it, hit, 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 and big damage, refresh ward, refresh Wither, if not, the Shock. And there's the Shock, and there goes the Discharge. And then from here, I could just do a little bit of Saber Striking, another Energizes up, hit that, and then we're going to Discharge with 3 stacks of Harness Darkness. And this is generally how the rotation goes. Obviously, I let my Dark Ward drop there, and my Wither drop there, and I didn't do it perfectly. I kind of hit a Wither before I hit a Shock there, if you noticed, but that's just because I was talking and thinking of other things. So it's definitely it's not a very easy rotation to get your maximum threat, but this is a good indication as to your understanding of what your threat values are for your class. So, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to check us out at our website. Link is in the URL. And please, if you like this guide and would like to see more, please remember to subscribe to us and like this video. Also, don't hesitate to ask anything in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. See you guys later.